Hey there, everybody. Cameron Morrissey coming to you with another live Q&A session on leadership and management. I'm doing these throughout the week so that everybody can just kind of pop in. If you have a struggle that you're dealing with, a question that you have, something that's been gnawing at you, these are great sessions for you to ask me questions, have me hopefully respond, and then also I always recommend and encourage everybody that's out there to contribute as well in the comments section. That's always great to have your comments on there. I don't pretend to have all of the answers, so it's great to have everybody else jump on as well. I got a lot of people jumping on right now. As you go ahead and get on here, I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. It's good for the community, for all of the leaders out there to know that they're not alone in these struggles. So let us know where you're chiming in from, and if you have a question, go ahead and drop down and ask it. But I'd like to dive right in because I got asked a question after the live session ended last week that I thought was really great for everybody. Hey, Kat, good to see you here. And that is, how do you deliver bad news to people when you know that they're going to have an emotional reaction to it? And bad news delivery is so essential in leadership. It's not all sunshine and roses out there for us, as everybody knows. So there's a few things to keep in mind when you're delivering bad news to the team or just a member, just an individual member. Steve, Mike, Donna, good to see you here as well. So the idea behind bad news is you want to first and foremost make sure that they know that the bad news isn't the destination. You want to give them some insight into the plan and the next steps after you deliver that bad news. So sure, something terrible happened in their performance, in the overall department, in the organization, but this is what we're going to do to get out of it. Abigail, Monica, Shazika, good to see you here. So let them know what the plan is moving forward on things. Let them know, like I say, that that's not the destination, whatever that bad news was, what you're going to do after it. And that helps cover some of that insecurity that they might have and tackle some of the unknowns. The second thing is you want to be as transparent as possible. All right, just in general in leadership. Dea, Coria, good to see you here. Joanna, Colette. You want to be as transparent as possible. So good news, bad news, you want to deliver it right away, and you want to give them the whole story. This is not some time to be holding back information on them. Let them know exactly what's going on. Again, so much of bad news is about understanding where it's coming from, what's going to happen, how we get out of it, that sort of thing. So be as transparent as possible. And then the last thing that you want to make sure that you do is you don't hand it out piecemeal. One of the biggest mistakes that leaders make is they try to, with bad news, just hand out a little bit of it. They think if they just give out a little piece of the bad news over 5 different times, that's easier for everybody to swallow, to keep using the food example there. So you don't want to hand it out piecemeal. You want to go ahead and hit them with all of it right away. The reason is because if you don't do it that way, then they're going to get trained in bad news, and they're going to be wondering when the next one hits. And that's the last place that you want to be with people, is them being concerned that there's more bad news coming down the pike and them running and working scared. So what you want to do is you want to present a plan. When you're giving bad news out to the team, you want to present the plan going forward. Great, here's the bad news. What are we doing about it? You want to be as transparent as humanly possible. Give them the whole story. Give them all of the information on so that they're secure on that. And then the third thing is just kind of a warning. Don't be piecemeal with your bad news. If you have bad news, if you have 3 different pieces of bad news, then give it to them all at once, because you don't want them scared that something else is coming down the pike. And that's the big thing that you want to be concerned about. And as I'd asked the question, and I'll ask it's please tell me how an HR person can sell their skills. And I'll tackle this in kind of a different way, because we have a lot of HR people that tune into these sessions. And I want to just talk about HR in general, and you can kind of take from this what you want to do as far as selling your own personal skills on things. So human resources oftentimes devolves into the place where discipline is tracked. And where you want to take with your human resources, and leaders can do this even within their own individual departments, is human resources is about finding talent and developing talent, because the talent and the people in the organization are its most important asset. It doesn't matter what the buildings are, what the patents are. You need people to produce those things, sell those things, nurture those things, improve those things. And just like that, You need to be improving that talent. So from an HR perspective, you want to know, how are you sourcing your people? How are you defining how you're getting those people in the door? How are you interviewing them? Do you know what traits you're looking for in successful people? All you need to do, if you don't know what the successful traits are, is look at your current team and look at who's on your team and is successful, and take what they do and what traits they have and apply that to your interviewing process. That's the simplest way to do that. The second thing is, how are you developing those people? Discipline is a part of that. Unfortunately, in many cases in HR, disciplines become the entire part of development. All right. So what are we doing as far as training is concerned? Are we doing mentoring? Are we doing shadowing? Again, there's lots of easy things that even on a department level as a leader that you can do and you can institute that don't require you to spend 3 weeks coming up with a huge training program for every single person on your team. So really focus on bringing people in, developing those people. That's what HR is all about. And then the final step is, unfortunately, trimming the herd if people are not a match for the organization and for their duties. But that's what I'd really focus on as far as selling skills, is how are you identifying and acquiring talent, and how are you developing talent? That's fantastic for HR purposes. Scrolling through here, I got people from all over. Darren, Miriam, good to see you here again. And then Mohammed from Dubai, excellent. Anita asked the question for us. I work in an environment of high turnover. The managers try their best to keep the atmosphere as engaging as possible, but sometimes it can feel disheartening. The feeling obviously spreads. In environments where there's a high degree of turnover, one thing that's important for that is to not lose the knowledge that those people that are leaving have. So what you do from a management perspective, you have high turnover, and a lot of us are in those situations where we are overseeing entry-level departments, where we don't have the control over the salary. So maybe we are, in comparison to our competition, not paying as much. Or it's just a high-stress environment. There's those environments as well that just breed that sort of high turnover. So having a high turnover environment is certainly a warning flag for your leadership, but I don't also want you to think that it isn't environmental as well. So in a high turnover environment, one of the most important things is that you don't lose that knowledge. So what you can do in those environments is that you can work on more teamwork and more mentoring and more shadowing, so that people are sharing their knowledge and working alongside people. It's not even necessarily a lunch and learn. Maybe a shift, you work alongside somebody, you shadow somebody, you listen into their calls, that sort of thing. And it's all part of the development of the employee. The staff that you have, especially if you have a large staff, has all of the best practices as far as performance is concerned being demonstrated on a daily basis. Some people may be demonstrating more of those than others are, but in a lot of those cases, it's just pieced out. And so even your superstar performers you can put together, and they will learn from each other different tricks of the trade and be even better. So in a high turnover environment, make sure that you are putting people together, make sure that they are learning from each other, so that overall you start taking those things and you can still make overall improvements in the organization, even though you're bringing in fresh talent. The second thing that you want to do in a high turnover environment is make sure that onboarding process is really nailed down. A lot of times where organizations go wrong is they hire the right person, but that first month when they're onboarding is confusing and disorganized, and you're putting them with the wrong people, and so they start out with a bad taste in their mouth. And a lot of times you can't overcome that. So take a look at your onboarding procedures and make sure that you're introducing everybody around the office. Make sure that their logins are set in ahead of time, that they have the supplies, that it isn't one of those things where you pop in and it's like a surprise that you arrived. Make sure that you've got your ducks in a row ahead of time. That time that you invest in onboarding them correctly is time that is going to be saved down the road with turnover and exit interviews and hiring even more people. So get them with the right people, have a training program in place to bring them on board, introduce them to the community, do your setup stuff. This is not, I want to say, rocket science on this. We just don't necessarily have the time for it. But especially in a high turnover environment, it's worth that investment because you make up that time on the back end, not having quite as much turnover. But those are those things with turnover. Make sure you're keeping the knowledge in-house and make sure you're starting out on the right foot to try to tackle that turnover a little bit. Odong joins us again from Uganda. It's good to see you here, Mike. My question is, how can you enable teammates to be able to wake up through rough times? And Mike, when you're going through a tough patch in an organization, it's often it feels a little bit like a grind. And so what you want to do with those teams is make sure that they know that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. So if you're going through a rough patch, let them know what the steps are and when you anticipate that end time is over. Letting them know that there's a light at the tunnel as opposed to, just this dark, unending hole that they seem to be walking through is so important as far as from a motivational standpoint. So let them know there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Acknowledge their concerns. It's tough going through those times, but let them know, hey, I know it's tough right now. We just need to hustle. We need to push forward, and this is what we're going to see at the end of the situation. The other thing that you want to do as a leader is make sure that you are taking more temperature checks of the organization, that you're communicating more with your team so that you can address those concerns that they have and nip it in the bud right away. What you don't want is a situation where you're busy on something else for a week and people are getting their questions not answered. They're getting that feeling of negativity and hopelessness, festering a little bit and building. It makes it much tougher to bring them back. So make sure you're communicating with your staff as much as possible, but empathize with them, deal with their concerns, but show them the path out and that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And that's the way to get through all of those rough patches that you're going to run across, because you're going to run across them in leadership on a very regular basis. Anita asked a similar question: how can we stay engaged while dealing with the bad? Part of it, Anita, is just an understanding of the way it is. And in leadership, we like to put a kind of a positive veneer on everything that we're dealing with, and we want to be positive on things, but there's going to be times where that positivity requires us to deal with difficult situations. There's a book by Spencer Johnson called Peaks and Valleys that's absolutely one of my favorites. And one of the big principles that it talks about in there is what you do when you're in the valley, when you're in that low spot dealing with the bad. What you do in those situations decides how deep that valley is going to be and how long you're going to be in it. Similarly, when you're at the peak, what you do when you're at the peak determines how high you go and how long you stay there. So this is all just part of the natural ebb and flow of things. So the more you stay engaged in the bad, and the more you deal with it, the more you deal with it head on, the quicker you're going to get out of it and the less bad it's going to be from those purposes. So that's my real advice, is to tackle it head on. The more you stay engaged with it, the quicker the bad goes away. That's the easiest way to deal with it. Jareva Mbaza, good to see you guys again here. Meryl, good to see you tuning in from Singapore. Melissa asked the question, what are your thoughts on group interviews? I love group interviews. Most of my interviewing, most half of the interviews that I've conducted over the course of my career were with somebody else in the room, where we could go back and forth on things. And especially if you're working with a partner on those sorts of things, I think that's really nice. Anything more than two people, I do think it is intimidating. But just from a personal perspective, obviously I've been in interviews where I've been interviewed by a panel before, and that's a little bit simpler from my perspective, from somebody who's a little bit more experienced perhaps in those sorts of things. But there's nothing wrong with two people. I also like handing off interviews. Instead of doing a group interview, what you can oftentimes do is have them go through a series of 3 different interviews. And you can ask different questions as long as the 3 of you are aligned on what you're asking, you know what questions are asking, that sort of thing. Then sending somebody through a few interviews and getting a few different takes. But I think hiring is so important that I think it is absolutely valuable, even if you can team up with a peer. So you've got your own department, you don't have a co-manager or supervisor or anything looking at it. Have somebody, a peer from another department, take a look at that person and interview them as well, and just get a second take on things. Sometimes people are great in an initial interview and then they expose themselves a little bit in the later interviews. And so I want to be mindful of that. The other thing that is brought up is I've done a few times is actually have them interview with a team lead or a more line level employee, one of their peers. And a lot of times what you'll get is they'll let their guards down because they feel like they're interviewing with a peer, not the boss. And so those are things. But I'm all for group interviews. See what works in your organization. I've done phone interviews before for people that are working in call centers. That is kind of a screening interview because, hey, they're working on the phone. I want to know how they're doing there. So be creative with that process. That one-on-one interview is perfectly fine. But I think that there are other ways to do that, and just relying on your own opinion and your own take on things one time is probably not the best way of handling this most important thing, which is interviewing. Next question we have coming in, and I got Lala from Cyprus on. Good to see Cyprus in this session today. Is how can you? Ahmed asked the question: how can you get on top of your team? So how can you be a micromanager without micromanaging? Is how I'll take that and kind of rephrase that question for you. The most important thing, Ahmed, is expectations. If you want to get on top of your team, if you want to improve their performance, one of the first things to do is let them know what good performance is. What are your expectations for them? And from there, then you can decide who needs extra coaching, who needs extra attention, who needs more mentoring, more shadowing, so that they fill out their toolbox of things that they can do in the organization. But set those expectations. That's how you decide who to get on top of and on top of their performance in a particular situation. But that's the real key there, Ahmed, is get on top of expectations first. Make sure they know what those are, and then you can address performance after the fact. That's how I'd handle that. Christelle asked the question: how can you involve your team in defining the mission and values of the company? Christelle, first of all, kudos for you considering that sort of thing. And I think that's something that so many other organizations should really be doing, because it really tackles that sense of purpose, and it makes motivation so much easier down the road when people have that ownership and we're a part of that process. So first of all, kudos to you on that. The next thing I do is send out a questionnaire, and you might handle this questionnaire in a team meeting standpoint. It might be a little bit more comfortable for people in that situation. But what you want to ask is defining mission and values is: what differentiates us from the competition? What do we deliver that competitors can't? What's most important in us reaching our goals? Maybe you need to take a step back and say, what are the goals of the company? But what's most important in reaching those goals? And the third thing is really what defines us. So forget about defining yourself against the competition. Forget about the goals for a second. But what do you guys do really well? What excites you? Where is the motivation there? But start with those questions. But I would pull everybody in probably a team session. If you had a dozen people, bring them into a team meeting and have questions set up ahead of time that start defining that. And so then once you have all of those questions laid out, then you can start putting them together a little bit. And you might come up with a second meeting where you take a look at 10 different things and nail it down that way. But ask those few questions. But I think it's great that you're doing that, and I think that that sort of questioning technique and bringing them in will provide you with a better mission and better core values for the organization. Newsad asks the question: how can we identify if we are the best one for the particular job? So one of the most important things when you're interviewing for a position, or when you're looking to ascend and move up the ladder into a different position, one of the most important things that you can do is take a look at people who are already in that position and successful. You want to take a look at those individuals, because that's an indication of what you need and where you need to be in your skill set to be successful at that job. So the better you are at identifying those individuals that have been successful or are successful in the job that you're applying for, the easier it's going to be for you to assess your talent, and it's easier it's going to be for you to match your talent and your experience to things that apply to that particular position. Interviewing is a lot of research into the organization, the department, the people in those organizations, so that you can match and call out where in your experience you meet those expectations. And so that's how I do it. I take a look at who's already successful in those cases. Mario asked the question: how to improve leadership in the team. And I think it's important that as leaders we are developing more leaders. And so the best way to do that is give them some experience. So if you have some projects that you need done, if you need something done while you're in a meeting or away at a customer call or something like that over the course of the day or week, then give them some experience running with those things and really let them run with the anticipation that they are going to stumble. All right, none of us ever got to our leadership positions without making mistakes. So being able to structure those mistakes a little bit and have it in an environment where you can be supportive of them is going to help them develop. The other thing that you want to do in regards to leadership is you really want to have the conversation with the people as far as where they want to go and what development they need to see. So yes, leadership is about taking that ownership of things, but it's also about developing individual skill sets. Are you developing your skill sets, Mario? Are you demonstrating what you want other people to do? Are you taking extra courses? Are you reading trade magazines? Are you learning a particular program? What are you doing to develop yourself? Because people need to be developing themselves if they want to move up into those leadership positions as much as possible. And the last thing that you want to do if you want to improve leadership on the team, ask them what they would do in a particular situation. When they bring you a problem, ask them what they would do. It's a simple way of bringing them into the conversation first and foremost and giving them some exercise providing the answer. Now, if they give you an answer that is counter to what you would recommend in that particular situation, it also allows you to open up that dialogue and discuss with them how it is that you came to your logic in the decision that you want to make. So ask them what they would do. You'd be surprised how good their answers are most of the time. And when they aren't up to snuff, shall we say, you have a chance to explain what your thought process is. And that's kind of training them in leadership as well. Our next question comes in today from Karen, and that is, should a company promote fair pay and then performance pay brackets and education pay brackets? How does an employee keep their pay within these brackets to make sure they are not being oppressed? Pay is always a very sensitive subject in organizations, especially when there are differing pay brackets. So you have a range for a particular position, and it varies. 10 to 20% usually is about what the variance is on those sorts of things. The key is to be as transparent as possible as to what it takes to get into those particular brackets. And you want to do that for yourself as a leader to understand where to put people in particular pay brackets. It might be that they interviewed great, but they have no experience, so they really should be at the lower half of that scale, not the upper half of that scale. Karen, in your case, I'd want to know what it is that goes into those pay brackets and how that you can improve yourself. What education levels are they looking for? Do they need, is it a situation similar to teachers where, you keep taking certain credit hours and achieve certain, master's degrees, PhDs, that sort of thing, but there's a bunch of steps that get to the pay scale. Is there that sort of thing that's in place? Are there, sales metrics or performance metrics that are in place? What moves the needle? What do you need to focus on to move that needle? So you can have that honest conversation with your leader or with HR. Now, if they don't have those clearly defined goals, then this is a great time to ask them what it would take for you specifically to move up to the next scale. What would they like to see from you so that you can continue to learn, grow, and get that extra pay? So if they don't have those clearly defined brackets, that's fine. You can just ask them what they need from you in those specific cases. Either way, open up that conversation. But from a leadership perspective, when you're talking about pay scales, make sure you have clearly defined metrics for what it is that drops people in certain pay scales. That way, if somebody like Karen comes to you with a question, you can go ahead and answer it, and it's very transparent and very fair for everybody. Next question comes in from Lisa Ness. How do I get hired? Not getting hours I need or jobs. What do I do to say in an interview to let employers know I need hours and sufficient pay? How to let employers know what my expectations are. I'm only getting 14 hours a week as a manager, and I need real opportunity. Thanks. And Alyssa, I'm really sorry that you find yourself in this position, but it's a position that is very real out there for people. And that is what you need to do is certainly you need to go into organizations with clear expectations on what it is that you're being hired into. If you're in a retail environment that I see there, that they start off as part-time. And I've been in plenty of corporations, big, huge, multi-thousand people corporations, where we started people at part-time. That was just how it started, and then you eventually graduated. That was one of the career progressions that took place, and one of the reasons for developing people was moving them from part-time to full-time. So make sure that you're applying for full-time jobs. As much as possible. Now, not getting enough hours is a perfectly good reason to be looking for a job. So when that question comes up in an interview, you're set from that perspective. But as I kind of mentioned before, you need to do a lot of research on what is going on in the organization that you're applying for. See if you can really dive into those job duties and that job description that they post online, and see where it is that your experience matches, and those are the things that you bring up. The other thing on interviews, and I can't believe that people don't do this more, you can Google the top 100 interview questions that are going to be asked of you in a particular, not in a particular situation, but that are out there. Take the top 30. Don't even take the top 100. Take the top 30 and answer those questions. That way, when you're in the interview, you are prepared, and you don't memorize your answer, but you have an idea of what your thought process is going to be. So you prepare with anticipated questions that you have ahead of time, and that way you can better match that experience that you have to the job description, the job duties, and the organization that you're applying for. That's so important in these cases. Now, in the case of questions that you might ask at the end of the interview, that's where you get into, what are the hours that I can expect? And ask them tough questions. Okay, if I start out at part-time, what is the current range of part-time hours right now this week? If they say 14 to 18, well, that's not going to work for you. If they say that their part-time hours are running 24 to 32, well, then that might be something to consider. All right, but be honest with what it is that you're looking for. Ask them what was the experience time that a person had moving from part-time to full-time. The last person that you moved from part-time to full-time, how long had they been a part-timer? If it was a year and a half, no good. If it's 3 to 6 months, well, again, that might be something that you consider. But make sure you ask them in those situations. But really apply for full-time jobs, look for full-time jobs, and if you can't find one, then look for those part-time jobs and ask those questions to determine how long it's going to be that you're going to be in a part-time situation. And in the case of having 14 hours a week right now, as you currently do, I'd look to juggle those two while you bridge that gap, that 3 to 6 months that it might take to move part-time to full-time, that you bridge the gap with 2 jobs at the same time. But that'd be my advice. But good luck with that, Alyssa. It's a tough spot, but a lot of people are finding themselves in that lately. Urama, I'm glad you're getting a lot out of these sessions. Really pleased with that. Jariv asked the question, how do you deal with rude people? Telling things what they just wanted to say without thinking that it hurts. Jariva, I take what others say with a grain of salt, and I certainly don't encourage the rudeness by being rude back to them. That never pays. Half the time that people are being rude and they do it for malicious reasons, they want you to come back with something so that they can throw the next counterpunch. They're kind of looking for a fight to a certain extent. What I will do in certain cases where it's recurring, and where, even in cases where it's malicious, not just unintentional, is I'll pull them aside later on and say, hey, I just wanted you to know I didn't really appreciate the way that you spoke to me earlier. I know that you were trying to empathize with them. I know that you were trying to get across this point, but it hurt my feelings, and I didn't take it as well as I could have. But let them know, especially in regards to people that are maliciously rude. It'll let them know that you're calling the behavior out and that you're a much bigger person, and that's not the situation that they want to find themselves in as kind of a bully. In those cases, but pull them aside, but take it with a grain of salt and think about it from their perspective as well, especially if it's unintentional rudeness. Really take a look at that and see if they weren't coming from a place of caring and it just came out wrong. They lack the people skills, whatever. But that's how I tackle rudeness. And if it becomes something where it's a hostile situation where they are continually rude and you're continually, kind of backing up a little bit, then those are those cases where you have a hostile work environment where you may want to take it to HR. But really give them the benefit of doubt of having that conversation with them first before you take that next step. You need to do your due diligence on those sorts of things as well. Urema asked the question is, how do you handle changes within a team that does not believe in new organizational culture? and again, this is a situation that's not uncommon. You can have a new boss that comes in, a new vice president, and they change the culture in the organization. What you want to do in your leadership position in that is you want to get as transparent as possible with people as to what's going on in the organization. So much of the fear of change and difficulty with change is fear of the unknown. They don't know what's going to happen. Is the VP going to fire everybody and bring in their old team from their old job? Are they going to change the way that things are doing? Are they going to move the office around? What are they going to do? So much of that is the fear of the unknown. So if you can communicate more and let people know what's going on, then that moves that change needle around. In the case of not agreeing with a new cultural standpoint, go that next level deeper with that culture. Ask your boss or the person that's instituting the change, if you need to go even higher than that, is what are they trying to accomplish with that particular culture change? Perhaps the bridge between where you were and where you are right now can simply be handled with a little bit better of understanding of what the overall goals are. And if you understand those goals, you can then see and you can put the pieces of the puzzle together a little bit to where it becomes a little bit easier to manage that change and deal with that particular situation that you find yourself in. But communicate, and find out what the goals of the changes are. If you can do those two things, then that tackles a lot of that fear and gives everybody a little bit more security as opposed to insecurity in a situation. The next question we have is from Adela, and that's how do you deal with an employee who is trying too hard to be liked and comes off very abrasive, causing friction among team members? Wow, that's a tough one. The other one that is the person that wants to be really liked and comes off as completely non-genuine. That's the other issue that comes up. I can't come up with anything off the top of my head other than pulling that employee aside and letting them know that you're recognizing that they want to be liked, they want to be a part of the team, and that's great. We want team members, we want team players on board here, but we also have a job to do. So we need to be focused on the job and work the team stuff into the job. That way they're not taking time away from their work to, glom onto somebody else and try to work a relationship, work on the relationship with them, that they're focused on their work and that they're working on team aspects of things when it's productive for the organization. And when they're working on those particular things, then that's time to go ahead and work on teamwork. But I'd phrase it more as teamwork as opposed to being liked. People will be a little bit defensive and feel like they're being needy, even if they are in those situations. But really try to focus them in on the work and working through the work to those relationships. And that'll give them a little bit of a different path to it. Now, if there's specific behavior that's coming off as abrasive, then you can address that at this time. Hey, it doesn't necessarily go over well when you're doing this. In that situation, I don't think that's accomplishing what you want to in this situation. So we want to do this. So identify a couple of those behaviors and then give them alternatives to it. That would be a great way to do it. Carol asked the question, how do you manage your time when there are so many demands? Along with this, how do you set boundaries with employers? So much is expected of managers these days. And Carol, that gets to the heart of why half the people are tuning into this particular session here. You cannot, I'm going to get real with everybody here, you cannot accomplish and finish everything that is on your plate. You can't. In today's modern organization, there is an infinite list of to-dos. If you got everything on your to-do list done with this second, your boss would find other nice to have things to have you work on in the meantime. You may very well have those nice to do things on your own plate that you'd like to get done. So if you got your to-do list, you'd have more things to do. The key isn't getting all of the work done. The key is to get the important work done. So Carol, what you want to do is you want to prioritize. Make sure that you are getting across the finish line the important things that you need to get across the finish line, and that those other things are things that you get to if you have the time, if you have the ability, that sort of thing. So that's the first thing to do, is really prioritize as much as possible. Now, from a boundaries question, that gets a little bit more sensitive at times. So I've done these two different ways. I've done it the passive way, And that is, if I don't want a boss bothering me on the weekends, but I don't want to have that hard conversation because perhaps they're not the sort of boss that is going to respond well to that, then I will move them into where I want to be. So the expectation may be that I'm available on weekends at certain points to ask questions. However, I can have flexibility within that to where I really check email at 11 o'clock in the morning and 7 o'clock at night, and I answer questions then, and not in between or not at other times. So don't respond immediately to those questions. I used to, being in an environment that was similar to that, I used to go hiking up in the mountains where I had no cell reception and I couldn't get a response from an email because I was out hiking. I'm at the gym swimming, that sort of thing. So I find those excuses. I turned it into a positive where I dove into hobbies a little bit. So you can do that passively. The other thing is to have that discussion with your boss. That's the best way to do it. So you can do it passively and try to get yourself there by just setting the expectations as far as your response is concerned on things. But the other thing is actually just having that discussion with your boss and saying, hey, I get it. There's things going on the weekends. How can we work together to do this? So it may be that you have that expectation. You need to be there on Saturday and Sunday. You need to be available. But can you have set times? Can you have a certain threshold that you'll get back to emails? Is it 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours? What is it? But have that discussion with your boss as far as availability is concerned. And if that doesn't go well, then you may be in a position where you need to move ladders and move organizations. And it's not advice that I like to give at all. But that sort of grind where personally you don't want to be that available and you have those boundaries in place, but the employer isn't respecting them, that's not going to be an environment where you're going to flourish. And I don't mean that from an outside perspective. I mean inside, you're going to be grinding yourself down and you're not going to be happy. So in those cases, look elsewhere. So you can deal with it passively when you have that boss that isn't going to react well to it. And I've done that before where I've made sure not to respond to emails till 2 or 3 hours after the fact. I respond to them on the weekend. But, that way I had that conversation with the boss. That's important to do. That's the best place to be on these sorts of things. And the third thing is, unfortunately, look elsewhere. I've shifted industries. I shifted industries from hospitality to manufacturing because I couldn't support the family life that I really wanted to support because I was constantly being bombarded on the weekends. Hospitality is very tough. It's very 24/7. Especially here in Las Vegas. And so it was very difficult. And so I eventually had to transfer industries to have the sort of work-life balance that I wanted, Carol. So that's my advice. Good luck. Next question that comes in is from Liliana, and that's, what is the best advice for developing and promoting individuals into leadership roles? Liliana, the first thing that I do is I look for who people go to when there's a question or there's a problem. Who on your team? You can identify the leader in an organization through that simple exercise. When people have questions, who do they go to? And when people have issues, problems, who do they go to? Oftentimes, it's not their manager or it's not their supervisor. It's a peer. And those are the people that I identify and try to have that conversation about what they want to do to move into a leadership position or a leadership role as much as possible. I also make sure, even in those cases, a lot of times that will identify those shy or introverted individuals. But I also, if it doesn't, I also have that conversation with those introverts out there as well. A lot of times your best people are the ones that are the most quiet. They're the ones that are thinking, not talking. And so being sure to embrace them as well. Then when you identify those individuals that you really want to work with, then you want to go ahead and give them projects, give them people to train. Training is an absolutely fantastic way of identifying leaders and seeing how they flourish, because so much of what leadership is mentoring and telling people how to do things in a way that gets them to perform well, which is exactly what a trainer should be doing. And the other thing is really relief supervisor positions. When you're on vacation, can you give them some certain things to oversee? Those sorts of things, just giving them that experience and seeing who really rises to the top. But even though I said identify those particular people, that's what most people want to do it. Cast a wide net. So give those projects out, give those trainings out to people who didn't even necessarily want to move into leadership or didn't show that sort of expertise. You'd be surprised who rises to the occasion. Too often we look for our leaders in our excellent individual performers. And that's fine, And a lot of times that works out well. But there's a lot of times where leadership skills are slightly disconnected from individual performance in that particular environment. Very different set of skills. So cast a wide net and see what takes. That's my big advice there. I know there's a ton of questions I didn't get a chance to get to. I will drop down into the comments section this afternoon. I'll answer all of those individual questions. I try to answer them all every single time. I'll be doing another session on Wednesday. Please check out the event section of my Facebook page. That has all of the listings for when I'm doing these live sessions so that you can be available. And it was really fantastic talking to everybody, and I will see you all on Wednesday. Have a good week. Bye-bye.